Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the idea of creating a multi-figure oil painting? Well, in this video, I share with you 5 easy steps that you can use to make a large multi-figure oil painting of your own. Step 1. Gather your reference material. Step 2. Design your composition. Step 3. Draw or transfer your design onto your canvas. Step 4. Paint in a neutral background. Step 5. Divide and conquer. As I paint my way through each figure, I'll explain each step in detail and how I put them to work in this large oil painting depicting this crazy year, 2020. Okay, let's do this! Welcome to my channel, Shelley J. Cox. Come along with me on my art journey. Okay, step 1 in gathering your reference material. With this painting, I ended up taking pictures from the internet. They were basically just generalized images. They weren't images that I was planning on copying exactly, so it didn't matter if there were copyright rules attached to the images. They're really just there as a guide. I wasn't copying them. So rule number 1, if you're taking reference material from the internet, just don't plan on copying it. But if you do want to take images from the internet that you can copy, then just make sure you grab them from a copyright-free site. Like a lot of times I'll use Pexels.com. So that's important. But with this picture painting, 2020, I was just so overwhelmed by all of the information that was coming out of the news and that was just everywhere about all of the Black Lives Matter, the COVID, it was just so much. And I thought originally that I was going to paint several paintings, and then I decided that I didn't want to spend months, maybe even like a half a year, painting this idea. So I pushed it all into one big painting, and that's where we ended up with this multi-figure large painting. This guy is 48 inches wide by 36 inches tall, and I pretty much got all of the main idea of the things that were really moving me, that really affected me as far as what's happening here in 2020. So yeah, that's where I ended up with there. But usually I prefer to do a photo shoot for my reference material. It's a little more involved. You've got to hire a model, you've got to have setting, lighting, all that, but it will always, most always, give you the best results. It's going to be more of you. It's part of the creative process. It's your thinking of building this painting from the very beginning. So that's typically what I like to do, is start with a photo shoot. But that's it. Step number 1, gather your reference material. Okay, in step number 2, planning the composition, it's a really good idea to start with just some simple, small, little thumbnail sketches. No detail, just really scratchy, sketchy, and just get your idea down, and that way you have something visual to start with. And a lot of times those thumbnail sketches will translate over into a noten for me, and that's just the use of black and white and maybe a gray value to kind of lay out your composition. And so once you kind of get close with your thumbnail sketch, then you can put some of the elements into Photoshop. Either just draw each element singularly and throw it into Photoshop so you can move it around. So basically you have your figures and any main elements in the Photoshop on different layers. And you've got your canvas laid out, either have it the same size as your canvas or a ratio a little bit smaller so you don't take up too much space in Photoshop. And then just start playing with the composition, move some elements here or there, and visually you can see where you want to place things. And then once you kind of settle and you feel like you're in a good place, then throw on top of that, an upper layer, a grid or an overlay of maybe the rule of thirds or the golden ratio or golden spiral. So I'm going to show you here a picture of my painting with the rule of thirds thrown on top. The rule of third works by dividing your canvas into thirds horizontally and vertically. The 4 points that intersect are good places to position important elements of your composition. So here you can see I've laid over top of my painting the outlines of the rule of thirds, and the intersecting points are where those little green dots are. I don't use the rule of thirds a lot with multi-figure paintings. I feel like the golden ratio or the golden spiral works better. It's also known as divine proportion, so who wouldn't want to use that? So the golden rule or golden spiral, it's kind of mathematically difficult to explain, but if you want to know more about the math behind it, then I suggest just Google it and you'll see the definition there. I prefer to just place the golden spiral template over my design, then stretch it to cover the entire canvas. Then I can easily see where I want to position my figures. You can see here how I've stretched it over the canvas for the painting 2020, and it's really nice the way that the figures kind of follow the arc of the top part of the half circle, and then it spirals around and almost lands on the policeman and the little girl that are in the little hug in the front. If I had thought about it sooner rather than later, I probably would have scooched that element over to the right a little bit so it would have fallen more into that golden spiral, but here's where we ended up. So when you're setting up your canvas in Photoshop to be able to lay in your elements and start playing with your design composition, just be sure that you've sized it to meet the same ratio that your final canvas is going to be. So for instance, I have a 48 by 36 canvas here, so I set up my Photoshop file to be 24 inches by 18 inches, or it could have been even smaller at 12 inches by 9 inches. But having the same exact ratio as your final canvas is important. Okay, time for step number 3. Now we're going to transfer or draw the composition that we've settled on onto our canvas. So there's a few ways you can do this. You can transfer your image with like a tracing paper situation. You could use a projector. You can put a grid on your canvas and then draw in your composition with charcoal or pencil. I decided with this painting 2020 that I would just draw with charcoal. I didn't even put a grid down. I just kind of eyeballed it based on the composition that I had originally drawn and put into Photoshop. My drawing doesn't have to be so precise because I'm not doing some kind of like paint by numbers situation here. The initial drawing is just to give me a general idea of where the compositional elements are going to be painted on the canvas. So, I mean, when I'm putting in the charcoal drawing, I'm really trying not to get too crazy with detail because I'm going to be painting right over top of it anyway. I mean, literally, I could just outline where each element or each figure is going to land, and that would be good enough because I don't want to be doing a paint by number situation. I want just enough information on the canvas to keep me in check. And I think you can really see that here as I'm painting this figure. I mean, really not paying, I don't think, any attention to the underdrawing in charcoal. Just putting down the image in a sort of selective start manner that I usually paint in. On the other hand, if you're going to be starting with an underpainting, which I often do, and I'll leave a link above so you can see how to start with an underpainting, then you do want to stay painting in the exact spot that your underpainting has designated for you, because you've put in a lot of time with the underpainting. It's actually its own painting done with correct values, correct positioning, the correct details. Those are there in the underpainting. So when you're laying down the color, you do want to keep those on top and in the exact same spaces. I opted out of the underpainting for this situation. I knew I wanted this painting to be more impressionistic, kind of stylized, and just really loose. I wasn't looking to do anything too specific. I didn't need to have an exact likeness of any of my figures, so I just went for it. So just a quick recap, we have covered steps number 1, which was gather your reference material, step number 2, which was plan your composition, and step number 3, which was to get your composition transferred onto your canvas. Now we're going into step number 4, which is basically think in layers like in Photoshop. So in doing that, we want to put in our furthest away element, which is the background. So I suggest for step number 4 that we paint in a messy background, a neutral color, something mid to dark value, because this painting is a dark painting. But if your painting was a little lighter in overall tone, then your background would want to be a little bit lighter. But keep it kind of neutral in color so that elements that will ride on top of it won't be too distracted. So hey, if you've been getting some value out of this, go ahead and smash that thumbs up button for me. And if you really want to follow me along on my art journey, then make sure you subscribe and then ring that bell so you're notified of when I upload a new video. You can expect a new video from me once a week, every Saturday. All right, step number 5, divide and conquer. So I'm going to start up in the right corner, so to speak, with this Zoom Room violinist. So she's the first figure. So what I mean by divide and conquer is you want to pick one figure to start with and paint that figure pretty much completely. Now, one of the reasons that I chose this figure to start with is she's one of the figures that's furthest towards the background. And, I'm thinking like in Photoshop where I'm painting in sort of like layers. So I painted her first. Then I moved across and I started painting the bad apple policeman. And the reason I went to him was he's behind the Catholic priest, so he's further in the background. So thinking in layers, that's my next figure that I am dividing and conquering. So staying with the background layer that he's on, then I'm just moving to the left on into that male figure that's being pushed, and then that black male figure that's behind him who's falling down. And then I just sort of kept coming around and down into that left corner. So after the male figure that's falling was painted, then I went right into that bird of prey, and then down into that toilet paper, around into the smashed rotten bad apple, and then I went back all the way over to the right and painted the Wall Street sad bull. So since I'm painting this bird of prey right now, let's just talk a little bit about what's going on here. So he's a bird of prey, and I know they typically don't fly with this little helmet thing on. However, since I am the master of my painting, I wanted him to be flying with his little helmet on. So I painted it with a little highlight of red. So it's like a red leather kind of helmet. And the reason being is color-wise, compositionally, I wanted there to be a spot of red somewhere in this region of the painting to help pull your eye circularly in a circle through the composition. So if you're looking at the painting in whole, then there's a little touch of red guiding you around and through the painting. So with our divide and conquer, we have painted so far 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 figures, including the bird, and 2 elements. So we've painted those based on where their position is in the composition, and now we're moving up into painting the centerpiece, the star of the painting, the Catholic priest shooting his water guns full of holy water. We've saved the Catholic priest to this point because he is in front of the 5 elements that we've already painted. And the final element that's going to be painted is that policeman kneeling down, giving a flower to the little girl who is directly in front of the Catholic priest. So we're just thinking in layers again, and we're working through the composition and dividing and conquering to paint each figure and element as it is coming forward away from the background. So when I first started thinking about this composition, I knew I wanted the Catholic priest to have this sort of matrix movement, like kind of out of body situation going on. I wanted him to be coming from all different directions, a center basic image, a left, a right angle for the position of the squirt gun. And I don't know, I think we might have gotten it. Looks pretty cool. So maybe you saw the Catholic priest when he was on the news. That's when I first saw it. And he was standing out in front of his church, dressed with his mask and his shield on and some gloves. And the people were pulling up in their car, rolling down the window, and he was squirting the holy water in through the window onto the person. So I just thought that was interesting, and I knew that I wanted to paint that. So he became the star of my painting. So here, even with the Catholic priest, since there are basically 3 of him, I'm starting with the one that is behind the image of the Catholic priest that is more forward. I chose the left, I believe, because I'm right-handed and I am going to be painting from left to right, and this way I'm not smearing across the paint if I was to come from the right going to the left. So this is my thought process on starting where I started with the Catholic priest. Again, we're dividing and we're conquering. And I hope you can see here how I've just used my reference material in a more generalized sort of way. I haven't copied any one reference image. Each image, or figure rather, in this painting, it's a bit more impressionistic style-wise than I normally do, but I am pretty much finishing each figure completely before moving away from it. Now this was some serious green that I was laying down here, and I don't know when the last time I painted with such a bright color was, but after it dried I did go back over it with a sort of a thinned down orange just to kind of neutralize it. I didn't want to have a lot of saturated color in this painting. I didn't want it to really scream happiness. I don't know, but so the flesh tones were really neutral, and I just wanted to have sort of a somber feeling coming from the painting, and I felt like that was going to require pretty grayed out neutral colors. So I really just had a lot of fun painting this painting. I was really thinking about the brushstrokes being the star of the show, second to the Catholic priest, of course, and just really making marks that could stand and look cool within the painting. I didn't want to blend or cover anything up too much. And I felt like that kind of conveyed the feeling of 2020, where it was just kind of raw and messy and it was uncomfortable, and nothing was too smooth or polished in 2020. So if you guys are up for it, I'd love to hear your critiques in the comments below, so feel free. I think quite a few artists had the same kind of feeling as I did. So, January came along and we all kind of thought we'd plan out our paintings for the year and they were going to be whatever they were going to be. But then this happened. And then all of a sudden, the things that I wanted to paint just didn't really make sense. It didn't feel right. It didn't suit my mood. And I just knew that I had to change and make different paintings. I'm not gonna scrap those painting ideas. I'll save those for another time, perhaps. But they just weren't. It wasn't gonna happen now. Not in 2020. So I went ahead and put this together, and it did relieve a lot of the feelings, the anxiety, or whatever you want to call it, that I was having. And since I've completed it, I feel ready to move on and do some new work that is not quite so somber and is back to my more original kind of portrait-esque style painting. So I have some things coming up that'll be interesting to see after getting this out of my system. I'd love to know if any of you guys felt that same way and had to change up your plans for 2020 with your artwork. Let me know in the comments. So here we are with our final figure, still in step 5 of Divide and Conquer, and getting this figure done. It's the one in the foreground, the closest one to the viewer. So I'm thinking that this can have a little bit more saturation and color, although you'll see I don't paint the flower very flowery and colorful, but I did give the little girl some nice pink in her dress, but it's still a little bit muted and grayed down. And of course I had to have some sort of peace sign in my painting, because what do we all want? Peace. So we're putting that on this arm of the uniform. And also the sign on the floor, you'll see that coming up for free hugs. Had to have that in there. Classic 2020 anyway. And I also went ahead and kept the background white because I wanted to paint kind of loose and almost scratchy in a way. And I felt like with little bits of white showing through all this dark painting that it would feel like some movement or even some static was happening. And I really like the way that it does do that. I think there's a lot of movement in this painting, which I like. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this walk through the year 2020. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to come along with me on my art journey and see where we all end up. So, all right, see you in the next one.